Have you ever been judged just by your appearance? Imagine walking into a luxurious place, ready to buy something you truly want, only to be dismissed immediately, just because of how you look. How would you react? Today, we're diving into a story full of unexpected twists, where a man is denied service at a high-end car dealership simply because he didn't look like a serious buyer. But what the manager didn't realize was that she was the one making the biggest mistake, and the price she paid was far greater than she ever expected. Watch until the end to see how this shocking story unfolds. And don't forget to leave a comment below. Have you ever been treated unfairly like this? How would you handle this situation? If you love dramatic real-life stories with powerful lessons, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel now. Because trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's uncover the truth that left everyone speechless. Under the blazing afternoon sun, the glass towers of Buckhead gleamed, reflecting the bustling movement of luxury cars on the streets below. Inside Adam Motors, a prestigious dealership catering to the elite, the air was thick with sophistication, the polished SUVs shimmering under the showroom lights. From behind a sleek mahogany desk, Mary surveyed everything like a queen overseeing her kingdom. She wasn't just a manager, she was the gatekeeper, the one who decided who was worthy of walking out with the keys to one of these precision-crafted machines. At 47, Mary had spent nearly 2 decades in the high-end automotive business, where million-dollar deals were made with just a few nods. She didn't just know the specs of every vehicle, she was an expert in reading people. Not everyone deserved these cars. One glance, and she could separate the true buyers from the dreamers who walked in just to gawk before leaving empty-handed. The door chime rang, pulling Mary from her thoughts. She shifted her gaze to the entrance as a tall man in his 40s stepped inside. He wore a navy blue hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers. Nothing remarkable. With a single glance, Mary had already made her decision. Not a buyer. The man silently surveyed the showroom, his eyes settling on a black 2024 Range Rover Autobiography. He ran his fingers along the flawless paint as if absorbing its craftsmanship. Then he turned and locked eyes with Mary. There was no hesitation, no avoidance, a brief moment of silence. Then he walked directly toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep, steady, polite. "I'm interested in the Range Rover. I'd like to know more about it." Mary suppressed a sigh. She had seen this before, people walking in, asking questions, pretending to be serious buyers when they had no real intention of purchasing. She forced a professional smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's the autobiography model, our top-tier edition," she said briskly. "It's priced at $165,000. The man nodded. "That sounds about right." Mary crossed her arms, tilting her head slightly. "Have you explored our financing options? A transaction like this requires excellent credit or a significant deposit." The man paused for a brief moment, then slowly shook his head. "I won't need financing?" That made Mary raise an eyebrow. She had encountered plenty of people pretending to be wealthy, but the truth always surfaced sooner or later. A faint, almost amused smile flickered on her lips. "I see. However, company policy requires a credit check before proceeding further." Across the room, Greg, a seasoned salesperson, frowned slightly. He knew Mary was lying. There was no such policy. But he also knew better than to interfere. The man showed no reaction, no irritation, no argument. Instead, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek leather wallet, and slid out a credit card. A black American Express Centurion. Silence filled the showroom. Greg held his breath. Mary didn't move, but something in her expression subtly shifted. Only the ultra-wealthy had that card. So, the man said, his tone still composed, "Can I take it for a test drive?" For the first time, Mary hesitated. She had already pushed this too far to backtrack now. The smile returned to her lips, but this time it was slightly strained. "We don't offer test drives on high-value models without verified financial documentation." The man's lips curled just slightly, as if he had expected this. "Ah, I see." But what Mary didn't know was that the storm was already brewing. Mark's footsteps glided quietly over the polished marble floor of Atom Motors, his gaze sweeping across the luxurious vehicles displayed under the refined showroom lighting. He didn't rush, he didn't flaunt. He observed with the calm demeanor of someone who knew these machines well. From behind the reception desk, Mary's sharp eyes scanned him like a high-precision sensor, analyzing and assessing in an instant. A tall man, broad shoulders, dressed simply in a navy hoodie, dark jeans, and well-worn sneakers. Nothing about him suggested he was a serious buyer, not by her standards. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He wasn't flashing a luxury watch. No greetings, no welcoming nods. Mary had already made her decision, not a customer. Mark stopped in front of the black 2024 Range Rover Autobiography. His fingers lightly traced the glossy paint, his touch deliberate, appreciative, like a man who knew what perfection felt like. A simple gesture, yet it held a level of finesse. He wasn't just passing through. He wasn't a dreamer wandering into this showroom just to admire the opulence. Mary narrowed her eyes, crossing her arms, her fingers tapping lightly against her elbow, a silent signal of her calculated patience. Mark didn't turn away, didn't falter under the distant atmosphere she projected. Instead, he walked straight toward her. "Excuse me," he said, his voice deep, steady, unhurried. "I'm interested in the Range Rover over there. I'd like to know more about it." Mary arched a brow. She was all too familiar with men like this, people who walked in, pretended to care, but never had any real intent to buy. She didn't like having her time wasted. "That's the autobiography model, our top-tier edition," she said crisply, laced with a hint of pride. "It's priced at $165,000. Mark nodded, as if he had expected the number. "Sounds about right for me." The response made Mary pause briefly, but she quickly regained control. A man like this, accepting that price without hesitation? "Have you explored our financing options?" she asked, her tone professional yet probing. Transactions of this magnitude require a strong credit profile or a significant upfront payment. Mark held her gaze, unwavering, unreadable. "I won't need financing." It should have surprised her, but she had heard claims like this before. Many had walked in, oozing confidence, only to be exposed during financial verification. A faint smirk touched her lips, half polite, half challenging. "I see." She tilted her head slightly, her voice smooth yet cutting. "However, per company policy, we conduct a preliminary credit check before proceeding further." Behind her, Greg, a longtime sales associate, frowned slightly. Mary was lying. There was no such policy in place, but he knew better than to intervene. Mark didn't react, not with anger, not with frustration. Instead, he simply observed her, calm, unreadable, patient. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached into his pocket, pulled out a sleek black leather wallet, and retrieved a metallic credit card. An American Express Centurion. The black card, the kind that spoke louder than any words, the kind only reserved for the ultra-wealthy. A hush fell over the showroom. Greg inhaled sharply, immediately realizing how badly this situation was turning. Mary didn't flinch, but something subtle shifted in her expression. A black Amex meant limitless spending. "So?" Mark said, still composed. Can I take it for a test drive? For the first time, Mary hesitated. She could feel the eyes of her staff watching, waiting to see how she would handle this mistake. A flicker of tension passed through her features, but she had gone too far to back down now. Her professional smile returned, but this time, it wasn't as natural. We don't offer test drives on high-value models without verified financial documentation. Mark's lips curved ever so slightly, as if he had anticipated this response. Ah, I see. But Mary didn't know that in this moment, she had just opened the door to something far beyond her control. The gleaming surface of the black 2024 Range Rover Autobiography reflected the soft glow of the showroom lights as Mark ran his fingertips along its sharp contours. There was no rush in his movements, no hesitation, just the quiet deliberation of a man who already knew his decision. His eyes swept over the SUV's meticulously crafted lines, absorbing every detail with a focus that suggested he wasn't just another passerby. From across the showroom, Mary watched him closely, her sharp gaze dissecting every move. She had seen men like this before, plenty of them. They strolled in with an air of curiosity, pretending to exude confidence, only to leave empty-handed once reality set in. And she was sure Mark was no different. He wasn't dressed in a designer suit. He didn't wear a watch that screamed exclusivity. Most tellingly, he had walked in alone. No financial advisor, no personal assistant, no entourage. That was enough for her to decide. Mark was not a real buyer. He turned away from the luxury SUV, his gaze shifting toward the reception desk where Mary stood, arms crossed, exuding quiet authority. His steps were slow but deliberate as he made his way toward her. "Excuse me?" His voice was steady, composed. "I'm interested in the Range Rover over there. I'd like to know more about it." Mary held his gaze for a moment before offering him a well-rehearsed, professional smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's the autobiography model," she stated crisply. "Our top-tier edition. It's priced at $165,000. Mark nodded, completely unfazed. "That sounds about right for me." Mary's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. She had encountered this routine far too often. Men who spoke with certainty, trying to project wealth. Yet when it came time to sign the paperwork, they always had an excuse. "Have you explored our financing options?" she asked, her voice poised yet subtly skeptical. "Transactions like this require strong credit approval or a substantial upfront deposit." Mark's expression didn't waver. "I won't need financing." The words should have been a surprise, but Mary had been in this business long enough. She had heard similar claims before, from those who wanted to appear wealthy but crumbled under verification. A hint of a smirk flickered on her lips, half polite, half challenging. "I see." Her tone was smooth, almost automatic. "However, per company policy, we conduct a preliminary credit check before proceeding further." From a few feet away, Greg, one of the veteran sales associates, frowned slightly. He knew Mary was lying. There was no such policy. It was a classic gatekeeping tactic, a way to subtly steer away customers she deemed unfit for the brand. Mark didn't react with frustration. He didn't even blink. Instead, he reached into his pocket, retrieving a sleek black leather wallet, and slid out a metallic credit card. Not just any card, an American Express Centurion. The black card, a symbol of unlimited financial power. The kind of card that didn't have a credit limit, because its holders never needed one. The showroom fell silent. Greg took in a sharp breath, realizing just how badly this was about to go for Mary. She didn't flinch, but a subtle shift flickered across her expression. "So," Mark said, his tone as composed as ever, Can I take it for a test drive? For the first time, Mary hesitated. She could feel the weight of her staff's stares. She had miscalculated, but she had gone too far to back down now. Her polished smile returned, but it was no longer effortless. We don't offer test drives on high-value models without verified financial documentation. Mark's lips curved slightly. Not quite a smile, more of an acknowledgement, as if he had expected this. Ah, I see. But Mary didn't realize. In this moment, she had set something in motion, something she would no longer control. Mark stood there, the American Express Centurion card, catching the soft glow of the showroom lights, a quiet yet unmistakable emblem of power. Anyone familiar with the world of luxury knew this wasn't just another credit card. It wasn't simply a payment method, it was a status symbol, a silent declaration of wealth so vast that proof was never necessary. Mary glanced at the card for a brief moment, but her expression remained unmoved. She had dealt with the ultra-rich before, and she had also seen more than a few frauds trying to bluff their way into privilege. Mark might have had a black card in his wallet, but that didn't mean he was serious. We don't offer test drives without verified financial documentation, she repeated, her voice still smooth, still composed. From behind the desk, Greg stood motionless, trying not to let his surprise show. He knew Mary was playing a dangerous game. If Mark was truly a high-net-worth client, rejecting him based on nothing but her personal assumptions could be a mistake of epic proportions. But if he was just another pretender, then this was nothing more than a routine day at Adam Motors. Mark didn't react immediately. Instead, he simply offered a faint smile, his gaze studying Mary in a way that mirrored the way she had judged him the moment he walked in. "Oh, I see," he said lightly. There was something in his tone, something subtle yet undeniable, that caused the air in the showroom to shift. He didn't argue, he didn't get angry, he didn't try to persuade her. He just remembered, and somehow, that was far more unsettling than any confrontation. For a moment, the silence between them felt heavier, but Mary maintained her controlled expression, her polished demeanor. She believed she had just dodged a wasted transaction. "I'm sure you understand that we have policies for a reason," she added, her voice sweet but lacking any real sincerity. A flicker of amusement passed through Mark's eyes. He slid his hands into his pockets, nodding slightly, as if he had just learned something valuable. "Of course," he said. Then, slowly, deliberately, he turned and walked away. But Greg felt it. Something wasn't right. He had worked with Mary long enough to know she had a habit of pushing away customers she deemed unworthy. But this time, something felt different. Not because of how Mark left, but because of how he didn't react. He didn't scoff. He didn't lash out. He didn't try again. He simply accepted it. And somehow, Greg knew this wasn't over. Meanwhile, across the showroom, Mary had already turned her attention to another customer, a distinguished-looking man in an expensive suit, currently eyeing a Bentley. She smiled warmly, offering him an entirely different kind of treatment than she had given Mark. But Mark hadn't left yet. He was casually inspecting a Mercedes-Benz G-Class, running his fingers along the door handle, his gaze calm and thoughtful. Greg noticed Jared, one of the junior sales associates, hesitating before stepping forward. "Hello, sir," Jared greeted, offering a polite smile. "Can I assist you with anything?" Mark turned to face him, his expression unreadable. "Actually, I was looking at the Range Rover earlier," he said evenly. "But I was told I couldn't test drive it unless I proved I was serious." Jared blinked, momentarily caught off guard. Well, I mean," he hesitated, clearly unsure how to respond. Before he could say anything else, Mary appeared beside him. Her posture was rigid, her presence authoritative. "Jared, I'll handle this," she said smoothly. Jared immediately stepped back, not daring to argue. Mark watched the interaction with quiet amusement, as if confirming something he already suspected. "You keep a pretty tight grip on your employees," he observed, his tone unreadable. Mary didn't flinch. "I believe I made myself clear," she replied firmly. "We serve a specific clientele. Not everyone qualifies." And then, for the first time, Mark smiled. Not a warm smile, not a pleased smile, but the kind of smile a man wears when he's just confirmed exactly what he suspected all along. "You know," he mused, his voice quiet but carrying weight, "I've been to a lot of dealerships. Some are great, some are awful, but I've never seen anyone work this hard not to sell me a car." Mary's smile faltered. "That's not what's happening here," she snapped. Mark merely raised an eyebrow. "Then let's make it simple," he said, reaching for his wallet. He pulled out a checkbook. "I'll write you a check right now, full amount, no financing, no games, just business." Greg's heart pounded. This was it. If Mary turned him down now, there would be no excuse left. Mary stared at him, her mind racing. She had painted herself into a corner, and for the first time all day, she felt something unfamiliar. Doubt. The air inside the showroom suddenly grew thick, almost suffocating, as Mark pulled out his checkbook. His movements were slow, deliberate. This wasn't just about purchasing a car anymore. It was about observing the reactions around him. The showroom lights reflected off the pristine white check, an unmistakable symbol of financial power, one that few could afford to ignore. Across from him, Mary stood frozen. In her 2 decades at Adam Motors, she had dealt with hundreds of customers. She had encountered the high rollers, the elite businessmen, and her fair share of dreamers pretending to be wealthy. But something about Mark felt different. Not because of the money he was willing to spend, but because of the way he commanded the situation. Yet Mary couldn't back down. Conceding would mean she had been wrong all along. "As I said," she spoke, her voice holding on to the last threads of confidence, "we have a financial verification policy before moving forward." A moment of silence passed. Mark said nothing. He simply looked at her. But in his gaze, there was something that made Mary feel as if she was standing in the middle of a cross-examination, a test she suddenly wasn't sure she could pass. From the other side of the showroom, Greg held his breath. He knew Mary had taken this too far. This was no longer about selling a car. It had become a silent confrontation between two people on completely different playing fields. And then the glass doors at the back of the showroom swung open. A man walked in, his stride purposeful, clad in a perfectly tailored navy blue suit, salt and pepper hair neatly styled, an unmistakable aura of authority surrounding him. Caria, regional director of Adam Motors, and he didn't walk toward Mary. He walked straight to Mark. "Mark!" Caria beamed, extending his hand as he approached. "I was just about to call you." The entire room froze. Greg saw the moment Mary's entire demeanor shifted. The confidence drained from her face, replaced by a look of pure disbelief. Mark shook Caria's hand, his smile casual, but his voice carried something sharper. "Purpose." "Just looking around," he said smoothly. Caria nodded, clapping Mark lightly on the shoulder in an easy, familiar way, before turning, his gaze sweeping across the room, until it landed directly on Mary. "Wait," Mary stammered, her voice quieter than before. "You two know each other?" Caria turned to her, as if the question was so obvious it barely warranted a response. "Of course," he said effortlessly. "Allow me to introduce, this is Mark Ellis, the new CEO of Adam Motors." Silence. the kind that swallowed the entire room. Mary didn't say a word. No one did. And Mark just stood there, watching her, a quiet, knowing smile on his lips. "Pleasure to meet you, Mary," he said, his voice carrying the weight of something inevitable. The atmosphere inside the showroom became so thick, so suffocating, that even the hum of the overhead lights seemed deafening. Every employee, from Greg to Jared, had their eyes locked on Mary. She stood frozen, her face unable to hide the sheer shock, as if she had just been yanked from the height of power to the depths of irrelevance. Mark Ellis, the new CEO of Atom Motors. The words echoed in her mind, repeating like a final verdict. Mary struggled to regain her composure, but her chest tightened. She had spent her entire career climbing to this position, becoming the gatekeeper of who was worthy of driving away in one of these luxury vehicles, and who was not. And now, within a matter of minutes, she was the one being judged. "This must be some kind of misunderstanding," she finally managed, clearing her throat, grasping for control. Mark watched her, not angry, not raising his voice. He didn't need to, and somehow that made it worse. "What kind of misunderstanding?" he asked, his voice as steady as before. Mary swallowed hard, knowing she had to salvage this somehow. "I apologize if there was any miscommunication," she said, her tone softening. "We have strict procedures in place to ensure transparency in all transactions. I was simply refusing to sell me a car." Mark cut in, his voice even, unshaken. Mary froze. A heavy silence swallowed the room. Behind her, Greg felt a chill run down his spine. He had seen people get fired before, but never had he watched someone dig their own grave quite like this. Mark continued, his tone calm, as if he were discussing the weather. "You looked at me, judged me based on my appearance, and decided I wasn't the kind of person who should buy a car from this dealership." He tilted his head slightly, his gaze razor sharp. "I just wonder, if I had walked in here wearing a suit, would we even be having this conversation?" Mary opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She knew the answer, and so did everyone else in the room. Correa folded his arms, his once friendly expression now stern, unreadable. "We don't run a company that operates on discriminating against customers," he said, his tone firm. "And I'm quite certain that credit verification before a test drive is not part of our corporate policy." His words landed like a direct hit to everything Mary had spent years building. She had lost, not because she refused to sell a car, but because she refused the wrong person. The showroom at Atom Motors had fallen into a silence so profound that one could almost hear a pin drop. Mary stood there, her once unshakable confidence now reduced to a fragile facade, threatening to crumble at any moment. She couldn't believe what had just happened. Only minutes ago, she had been the gatekeeper, the one who decided who was worthy of walking out of here with a luxury car. Now, she realized, that control had never really belonged to her. Mark Ellis, the new CEO of Atom Motors. He hadn't needed to raise his voice. He hadn't accused or demanded explanations. With nothing more than a quiet resolve and a few simple questions, he had forced Mary to confront her own mistake in the most ruthless way possible, by letting her actions speak for themselves. "So, am I qualified to buy a car here now?" Mark's voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Mary tried to keep her posture straight, but she could feel the weight of every gaze in the showroom pressing down on her. Greg, Jared, the other employees. They were all waiting, watching. She could keep resisting, could try to hold on to whatever power she thought she still had. But she knew, they all knew, this battle was already over. "Mr. Ellis," she said, her voice noticeably quieter, I sincerely apologize if there was any misunderstanding. Mark nodded slowly. I understand. 2 words. They carried both forgiveness and a warning. Caria, the regional director, exhaled, a long, disappointed sigh. Clearly, this is not how we want our customers to be treated, he said, his gaze sharp as he turned to Mary. A long silence followed. Mark didn't say another word. He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been made clear by what had just transpired. He simply stepped back, glancing around the showroom, taking in the faces, the details, committing them to memory. And then he turned and walked away. Mary wanted to say something, to fix this, to salvage what she could, but there was nothing left to say. She had made a mistake that couldn't be undone. As Mark walked away, it was as if the energy in the room shifted with him. The employees, who had once respected and feared Mary, now looked at Mark with a quiet reverence. He hadn't just come here to buy a car. He had come here to change the way things worked. And Mary knew she had just lost her place in the world she once thought she ruled. The silence in the Atom Motors showroom was thick and suffocating, as if the air itself had stopped moving. No one spoke. No one dared to. Mary stood frozen, her fingers unconsciously tightening around the diamond bracelet on her wrist. But its shimmer no longer made her feel powerful. She had rejected Mark Ellis, the CEO of this very company. Not because he lacked the financial means, but because she had decided from the moment he walked in that he wasn't worthy. And now Mark stood before her, his expression unreadable. Not angry, not bitter, not even smug. And that was what terrified her the most. If he had been furious, she might have been able to argue. But his silence said everything. To him, she was no longer relevant. Caria, the regional director, sighed, his eyes cold as they swept over her. Clearly, Mary, this is not how we do business. That single statement cut through the last shred of confidence she was clinging to. She had spent her entire career making herself irreplaceable, believing she controlled every major deal in this showroom. And yet, in this moment, she realized the harsh truth. She controlled nothing. Mark held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I've seen enough. His voice remained calm, yet undeniably firm. Everyone around them understood. This conversation was over. Mary wanted to defend herself, to claim she was just doing her job, that this wasn't personal. But even she didn't believe that anymore. No one spoke up for her. Not Greg, not Jared, not a single one of her employees. Some of them wouldn't even meet her eyes. And that was when she realized she had lost. There were no excuses left. No way to reverse what had been done. Mark's eyes stayed on her as he spoke one last time. I hope you take something away from this experience, he said, his tone even, yet carrying a weight she couldn't ignore. Because what you've lost here today isn't your job. It's your opportunity to be better. A cold chill ran down Mary's spine. Mark didn't wait for a response. He simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing there alone in the very showroom she once thought she ruled. But now, all she had left was a fading shadow of her past, and a future no longer in her control. The Atom Motors showroom no longer felt the same. The once sleek, luxurious atmosphere was now tainted by an unspoken tension that everyone could feel. Mary stood still, lips pressed tightly together, as if trying to hold on to the last shred of control she had left. But she knew everything had crumbled. Mark hadn't needed to raise his voice. He hadn't needed to argue. With nothing more than his calm demeanor and sharp questions, he had flipped the entire situation, shifting the eyes in the room from respect to doubt. What had just happened wasn't merely a personal confrontation. It had exposed something deeper, a culture of silent discrimination, one that Mary had upheld for years. Caria, the regional director, slowly shook his head. "I can't believe this happened right in front of me," he said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "We are a company that serves high-end clients, but that does not mean we get to exclude them based on personal bias." Mary wanted to respond, wanted to defend herself, but she knew that anything she said now would only make her look more pathetic. She could feel the weight of every gaze in the room. Greg, Jared, the other employees, people who once respected her, now simply stood there, watching her downfall in silence. She had once believed that she understood clients, that she could read a person and instantly know whether they were worthy of an Atom Motors vehicle. But now, she realized, she was wrong, and that mistake had cost her everything. Mark didn't even look at her anymore. He simply turned to Caria, his voice calm but heavy with authority. "We need to reevaluate how this dealership operates. There's too much that needs to change." Caria nodded. "I agree." And with that one simple statement, Mary's fate was sealed. No one needed to say it out loud. She knew exactly what was coming. No one pleaded for her. No one stood up for her. She had spent years standing at the top, believing she was untouchable. But now she realized she was nothing more than a woman left behind. As Mark walked away, the entire room seemed to move with him. No one cared about Mary anymore. She had lost everything, not just her job, but her status, her credibility, and the respect she once thought was unshakable. The silence inside the Atom Motors showroom was no longer the kind of luxury that exuded prestige. Instead, it was a heavy, suffocating stillness, one filled with unspoken tension. Mary still stood there, but she was no longer the woman who controlled every transaction, no longer the gatekeeper who decided who was worthy and who was not. She had once believed she understood the rules of the game, that she was the one who held the power in this place. But in this moment, she realized that power had slipped through her fingers, irreversibly and undeniably. Mark didn't need to say anything more. He had given her the chance to correct herself, to recognize her own mistake. But Mary had been too blind to see it, until it was too late. There was no need for an official termination. Caria didn't have to say out loud that she no longer belonged here. Just by the look in his eyes, Mary knew her career at Atom Motors was over. She wanted something, anything to hold on to, a final excuse, a way out. But all she had left was the undeniable truth. She had pushed herself out of the game. Greg watched her in silence, not with pity, not with satisfaction, but with the look of someone who had just witnessed a lesson he would never forget. "There will be some changes here," Mark said, his voice calm but unwavering, "and I will personally oversee them." That was it. No argument, no second chances. Mary took in a deep breath, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in her chest. She had once believed she was irreplaceable, that without her, this dealership wouldn't function as smoothly. But now she faced a harsh reality. She was not as important as she had thought. As Mark walked away, the atmosphere in the showroom shifted. Employees returned to their work, as if turning the page on an old chapter. But for Mary, this was not a new beginning. This was the end. She stood there for a long time, staring at the gleaming cars under the showroom lights. The same cars she had once prided herself on controlling who could own them. But now, she no longer had that power. The lesson from Mary's fall. Mary's story serves as a powerful reminder of the danger of bias and the consequences of judging people by appearances. She believed she could read people in a single glance, that the power she held gave her the right to decide who deserved to be taken seriously. But reality proved that snap judgments are not only flawed, but can also destroy a career. Mary's downfall didn't happen because of a single mistake. It happened because of a mindset, a deep-seated belief that her authority was absolute. She failed to realize that in business, especially in luxury sales, control is not about power, but about respect. A transaction is not just an exchange of money, but a reflection of how a company treats its clients. Mark's appearance was not just a test of Adam Motors' values. It was a test that Mary failed. Her failure wasn't in denying a sale. Her failure was in denying a person's worth before even understanding who they were. The difference between success and failure is not in where someone stands today. It is in their ability to learn, adapt, and change when necessary. The greatest lesson from this story? Respect and fairness will always be more powerful than prejudice and authority. A job can be lost. A reputation can collapse. But the values we uphold, honesty, integrity, and the way we treat others, will define who we are in this world. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.